Hey. Before I proceed with the rest of my core message that patriarchy was never biblical, I think it might help more of you receive what I'm saying if you are first clear that I have the authority to be out here saying it. So, let's go ahead and address the elephant in the room and set the record straight. Anyone telling women they can't teach or can't speak Yah's word or you can't teach me, sis, is twisting scripture and ignoring the plain record of the word itself. From Torah to the prophets to the apostles, women have always been entrusted with instruction, prophecy, rebuke, and teaching. Yah never silenced his daughters. Before I dive in, I want to touch on the poetic beauty of Proverbs 26, 4-5, because I try to apply it in my social media engagement as best I can, and I invite you to do the same. At first glance, these verses look like a contradiction. One says, "Answer not a fool according to his folly." And the very next says, "Answer a fool according to his folly." But this is absolutely not a contradiction. It's a demonstration of the wisdom and discernment of our elders. Both verses are true, depending on the situation. And you'll often hear me say this: context is key. Verse 4 teaches us not to stoop to the fool's level. If you argue with them on their terms, you end up looking just like them. Sometimes wisdom is silence. Sometimes the right answer is to walk away. Verse 5, though, reminds us that there are other times when silence is not wisdom. And if you let a fool's words stand unchecked, they'll walk away puffed up, thinking they're right. And others may even be misled by their foolish words. In those moments, you do respond, not by copying their foolishness, but by exposing it with the truth. So what looks like contradiction is actually discernment. And the goal is not to never answer or to always answer, but to seek Yah's wisdom, to know when to respond and how to respond. The real lesson is, don't become a fool when you deal with one. That's the hard part sometimes. To avoid either of these responses from me, please be sure to do your own due diligence in these scriptures before diving headfirst into my comments, okay? Okay. Now on to Yah's women of faith. First, let's talk about women as prophets and leaders in Torah. Deborah, for example, Judges 4 and 5. She was not just a prophetess, she was also a judge of Israel. Men and women alike came to her for instruction and judgment. And when Barak hesitated to obey Yah's command, Deborah rebuked him. Yes, she rebuked a man. She told him, because of the course you're taking, the honor will not be yours. Yahuwah will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. Child, that's a whole nother message. But her leadership, her judgment, her rebuke, her prophetic direction, and prophetic order, all preserved as holy scripture. Then we got Miriam in Exodus 15 and Micah 6. She was a prophetess. She led the people in worship after the Red Sea crossing. And Yah himself named her right alongside Moses and Aaron and said, "I sent Moses to lead you, also Aaron and Miriam." That means Yah affirmed her leadership as equal to her brethren. Then Huldah, 2 Kings 22 and 2 Chronicles 34. When the book of the law was rediscovered, King Josiah and the high priests, men, went to seek out Huldah, the prophetess, for interpretation. They sought her out. She claimed Yah's judgment and gave instructions to the entire nation. A king, priests, officials all bowed to her word because Yah put his message in her mouth. And then there's Abigail, 1 Samuel 25. When David was about to shed blood in vengeance, Abigail boldly confronted him, a man. She rebuked a man with wisdom and prevented sin. David admitted it. He said, "Blessed be your advice, and blessed be you, because you have kept me this day from bloodshed." Her words turned aside wrath. David submitted to her rebuke, the rebuke of a woman. Proverbs 31:26 says this: She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the law of instruction and kindness is on her tongue. The word law there is Torah. So Torah itself affirms that the law of instruction rests on a woman's tongue as well. And silencing that woman would then not be Torah. That would be a distortion or dysfunction. Joel 2 says, your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days. Notice, Yah's spirit is reserved for his servants. That's men and women alike. And he commanded us, do not quench the spirit. Do not despise prophecies. 1 Thessalonians 5:19-20. So, if Yah gives a woman an utterance and she disobeys his command to speak it, she pays the consequences for that disobedience. Her and her alone. His spirit is not restricted by gender. Period. Mary, the mother of Yahusha, in Luke 1, she lifted her voice in prophetic declaration, proclaiming Yah's justice, his mercy to the humble, and his overthrow of the proud. Anna, the prophetess, in Luke 2, she prophesied in the temple, speaking openly of Messiah to all who were looking for redemption in Jerusalem. That's a public proclamation. And then we have the Samaritan woman, John 4. She testified about Messiah to her whole village. And many Samaritans believed in him because of her testimony. That's evangelism. That's women speaking Yah's word. Mary Magdalene in John 20, the first witness of Messiah's resurrection. Yahusha himself told her, go to my brothers and say to them. She literally became the first preacher of the most central truth of the gospel, the Besorah, that he had risen. If women couldn't speak, Yahusha would not have commissioned her. And let's talk about Priscilla, Acts 18, alongside Aquila. She taught Apollos, a man, explaining the way of Elohim more accurately. And then notice, scripture lists her name first, actually. Philip's unmarried daughters in Acts chapter 21. 4 unmarried women who prophesied. Their prophetic voices are recorded without any restrictions to that voice. Then we got 1 Corinthians 11:5, where Paul acknowledges women praying and prophesying in the assembly. He regulated how they do it, not if they could do it. Then Romans 16, Phoebe, a deacon entrusted with carrying Paul's letter to Rome. Pretty sure she probably read it out loud and taught what it meant. Junia, Romans 16:7, called outstanding among the apostles. Outstanding. Girl, you knocked me out. At Galatians 3:28, that talks about there is now neither male nor female. We're all one in Yahusha. That's equal authority, equal access, equal inheritance. Now let's deal with the favorites that y'all love to quote out of context and misappropriate to subjugate women. Starting with 1 Corinthians 14. This is the one that says, women be silent. But again, context is key, right? Corinth was a chaotic church. People talking over each other, tongues with no interpretation, prophets interrupting each other. Paul was laying out order. Verse 28, if there's no interpreter, the man speaking in tongues must be silent. The man. Verse 30, if another prophet receives revelation, the first one must be silent. There's no gender in that verse. Verse 34, women in that specific assembly were told to be silent because they were disrupting order with questions and chatter. In that same letter, Paul already said women were prophesying publicly, 1 Corinthians 11:5. If he meant silence for all women everywhere, he'd be contradicting himself right there in the same letter. This passage is not about subjugating and silencing women. It was about disorder in Corinth with both genders. It wasn't a ban on women speaking Yah's word. Y'all got to keep it in context. And then 1 Timothy 2 is another one. Timothy was leading in Ephesus, a city dominated by the cult of Artemis, where women were running false worship. Like Jezebel, Paul's correction was local, not universal. He said women should learn in quietness. That alone was radical back then because rabbis often forbade women to learn. Paul said, no, they must learn. And then in verse 12, he restricts women from usurping authority. The Greek word authentine, meaning domineering, controlling authority, not speaking truth altogether. Paul himself commended women, prophets, teachers, deacons, apostles. So this so-called ban on all women, no, you have to keep it in the local context. We can apply that today to any church where there's that much chaos. That's it. And then I just want to touch on Romans 14:12, where it says each of us will give an account of ourselves to Elohim. On Judgment Day, no man will stand up for his wife. Like a husband's opinion will never override Yah's command. Exodus 20:3 says, you shall have no other gods or El before me. When you elevate a man's authority over Yah's word, you've made him your Elohim, which is idolatry. His voice should not be able to suppress the voice of Elohim speaking through a woman. So bottom line, the word itself proves women prophesied. Miriam, Anna, Philip's daughters. Women judged and rebuked. Deborah, Abigail, Huldah. Women instructed. Priscilla, the Proverbs 31 woman, the woman who proclaimed Messiah. Women led in righteousness. Esther, Phoebe, Junia. Yah never muzzled his daughters. Men who twist Paul to silence women are misreading him and flagrantly ignoring the Torah and the prophets and the Messiah himself. If Yah himself put his word in a woman's mouth and in her womb, who are you to try to shut her up?